Hi, how are you? I hope you all are doing great. So this is a video of a quick revision on all the SFM formulas. So you have the formulas right from mutual funds, portfolio, equity, bonds, M&A, foreign exchange, derivatives, risk management, and all the new topics, as well as the old topics of capital budgeting, risk analysis, money market, factoring, and dividend policy. So the initial 1 hour, you will probably have around 110 formulas of approximately of the new course, and then the later part you have around 40 to 50 formulas of the old course. So I've mentioned all the video timeline in the comment section below. Go through this video. It's a quick revision. Of course, I've solved it on the screen, so I have also attached a well written note of all the formulas, which you can get it from the download section of our website eduinvest.in. So, that link as well I have put up in the comment section down there, and so you can go through the you can take a print of all the formulas, you can practice with me. This video is exclusively made for the last day revision, so I have not done a detailed explanation of this. Detailed explanation of the for of all the formulas you can find it from my other YouTube videos, where I have put up videos exclusively for equity valuation, portfolio, FCFF, FCFE, corporate valuation, and so on. So that video you can get if you want to do in detail. This is just a short and quick revision, so within an hour you can practice up all your formulas for SFM on the last day, and so that while you go for the exams you don't miss out on any formulas, and I've slightly explained some derivation as well. So go ahead with this video, excel in your SFM exam. SFM is an exam for exemption, and you're going to score great. None of the formulas are very difficult here except few of them. I've tried explaining them, and let me know your views and your feedbacks in the comment section below. Thank you so much, and all the best for your exams. So on our website, on the download section out here, you will find all the material which you require for the last day revision. So you can find all the download material from here. You have the formula, you have the top 100 sums. I have also uploaded on my YouTube channel top 20 sums. You have the playlist of all the RTPs which are solved there for new and old course, in on my YouTube channel, as well as in the particular section out here. So you can go to our website eduinvest.in and can find all the details that you require for SFM. So let's start with the mutual funds formula, and the first formula is NAV per unit. Now for the formula of NAV per unit, we have market value of all investments, and these investments will include your equity, debt, as well as cash. So I will write market value of all investments including cash, plus we will have receivables. Receivables is dividends, plus the accrued income. Accrued income is with respect to interest on bonds, less the accrued expenses, which is with respect to the fund management charges and other charges, less outstanding liabilities, if any. But since it's an open-ended fund, we'll also add the inflow in the fund, which is the units subscribed at a particular NAV. So we'll multiply with NAV minus the units which are redeemed during the NAV calculation times the NAV. So this will tell us the inflow and outflow in the fund. The inflow is what we add, the outflow is what we subtract. All this will be divided by number of units outstanding. Now what is number of units outstanding? Well, number of units outstanding basically is nothing but the opening units of the fund which you have while the NFO, during the time of NFO issue, plus the units which were subscribed during the NAV calculation date, subtract the units which were redeemed during the NAV calculation date. So this is how the NAV formula looks like. I've ensured that this is a completely exclusive formula on exhaustive formula perhaps on mutual fund NAV, right? The second formula are with respect to loads, and we know we have two types of loads, entry and exit load. So the first formula where we entry load is included is sale price. Sale price is the price at which the mutual fund company sells the mutual fund, that is NAV times 1 plus entry load percentage. And while you sell the fund, that time you are received the repurchase price, which is nothing but NAV, and from that we subtract the exit load in percentage. This is the formula with respect to loads. The third and the most important formula is with respect to returns. There are different types of returns. We will take holding period return, we will take annualized return, and then compounded annualized growth rate. So holding period return is NAV ending minus the NAV beginning plus income plus capital gain. Your income is dividend and interest, and capital gain is while buying and selling the fund, divided by the beginning NAV into 100. This is your holding period return. However, when you want to annualize it, you will simply do holding period return times 12 by T if it is in month, or holding period return into times 365 by T if it is in days. Do also ensure that check the number of days given in the question. If they give you 360, you take 360. Compounded annualized growth rate is 1 plus R raised to T minus 1. Now how do we get this? This is derived from the time value equation, where you have present value into 1 plus R raised to T, which gives you future value. Here 1 plus R raised to T is the compounding factor. This return formula is with respect to when you have the options of dividend payout and dividend reinvestment. But remember, when you have the dividend payout and growth, this is with respect to dividend payout option or growth option. But when you have dividend reinvestment or bonus option, then your formula slightly changes. How does it change? There's a minor change in the formula, and there the returns will not be ending NAV per unit, but it will be ending value per unit. I'll write this in the next page. So here the formula will be of returns will be ending value minus beginning value divided by beginning value into 100. Here the beginning value or the ending value is nothing but ending NAV times the units at the end, and beginning value is beginning NAV times the unit during the start. Right, this is very crucial. Remember, this formula is to be used when you have dividend reinvestment or bonus option in your scheme. Correct, this is very crucial. Now the next formula is when you have closed-ended funds. In closed-ended funds, one formula which will be exclusively used is the percentage of discount or premium. Remember, in closed-ended fund, the fund is sold on the exchange as well, so they are compulsorily listed on exchange. So you have an exchange price of the fund which may be different from the NAV. So if it is greater than NAV, this answer will be positive, it is premium. If it is less than the NAV, this answer will be negative, and that is going to be the discount. So after returns, we have the closed-ended formula, a premium and discount, and then you have the expense ratio formula, which is again in percentage terms, and here it is in the numerator you have the total expenses of the scheme, which are decided by the SEBI, capped by the SEBI, how much percentage it should be, divided by you take the average NAV into 100. Now in reality, the average NAV can be average weekly, average monthly, and so on. As per the SEBI's rule, it is average weekly assets. However, you need not worry about this because this must be mentioned in the question. Till date, they haven't asked you the expense ratio formula. So overall, we have in the mutual fund, the first formula we had is about the NAV per unit. I've included everything in the NAV formula. Then the second is with respect to loads, with the sale price and repurchase price. And then in returns, you have holding period, simple annualized and compounded returns. Also, you have returns when you have dividend reinvestment and bonus option. With respect to closed-ended funds, you have discount or premium formula, and then you have expense ratio formula. There are also other formulas with respect to performance evaluation where you have Sharpe trainer and Jensen's alpha, which I will be covering in the portfolio. So now we are starting with the formula of a topic which has the highest number of formulas but the most scoring one, and that is portfolio management. The first formula will be of returns, and that formula is P1 minus P0 plus income divided by, I will do P0 into 100. Here the P1 is the ending price, P0 is the beginning price, plus income, which can be dividend if it's stock, if it's bond it's interest, if it's real estate it can be rent. Correct? This is going to basically give you year on year returns, right? However, when you want to do average returns, that average return is what we say mean, and then we focus on to average risk, which is nothing but standard deviation. And this means, and this standard deviation can be calculated for the past data, which is going to be without the probability, and the expected or the future data, which has the probability as well. So without probability, the mean, which is called as the x bar, is summation of x over n. With probability, the x bar is x times the probability. So you can write x times the probability. X can be a stock, and that you will do for all the scenarios, and then you will do the summation. For standard deviation of x, we say x minus x bar the whole square. We then do the summation, then we do the average, and then we do the square root. So this gives us standard deviation. If we don't do the square root, we get the answer as variance. Same way with for probability, we do x minus x bar, but we square it, and then we multiply with the probability, and then we do the summation of it. Remember, we don't do divide by n. This is variance, and then when I do the square root, I get the standard deviation. When you have portfolio, you also take the joint risk, which is called the covariance. For covariance between two stock, let's say it's x and y, the formula is x minus x bar, y minus y bar. We do the summation of this product divided by, we will be doing n. Same way with probability, x minus x bar, y minus y bar, we multiply that with probability, and then we divide it by n. Remember, for covariance, we neither do the square nor do we do the square root. What is the problem with covariance? The problem with covariance is that it has unlimited range. It goes from minus infinity to positive infinity, and that's why we also calculate the correlation. Correlation for a stock is nothing, for two stocks, that is xy, is nothing but covariance of xy divided by standard deviation x times standard deviation y. Now this formula can also be used to find the covariance xy using correlation xy times standard deviation x times standard deviation y. They both are the same thing, nothing different here. It just depends on what is asked and what is to be calculated. So this way you get the mean, the standard deviation, and the covariance for without probability as well as with probability. Now let's start with the formulas on portfolio management, which is a topic which has the maximum number of formulas. So the first formula is year on year returns, and for that I have the ending price minus the beginning price plus income divided by the beginning price into 100. The income can be dividend if it's stock, it can be coupon if it's bond, it can be rent if it's a real estate. However, we are more concerned about the average returns, which is mean, then the average risk, which is the standard deviation, and if it's a portfolio, we are concerned with the joint risk, which is covariance. So these are the formulas which are very, very crucial. Now you have to understand that we have the past data as well as the expected data. So we have a data where you are dealing on past data, that is without probability, and the future data, that is expected data, which has with probability. So that's where we'll be dealing with the formulas. So now for mean, the formula, that is x bar, is summation of x over n. Similarly, for probability, we have mean as x multiplied with probability and its summation. For standard deviation of x, we have x minus x bar the whole square. We do its summation, we do divide by n. This is nothing but this is variance, but when I do square root, I get standard deviation. Similarly, in case of probability, it is x minus x bar the whole square times probability, and then this entire stuff I will do summation. I don't have to do divide by n, this is variance, but when I do square root, I get standard deviation. Remember, risk is always calculated in variance but converted into standard deviation. For covariance, covariance is actually between two stocks, so it is x minus x bar, y minus y bar. We do the summation of this and then we divide this by the number of period. For probability, it is slightly interesting. It is x minus x bar, y minus y bar times the probability. Then we do the summation of this and then you don't have to do divide by n. The problem with covariance is that it has unlimited range. It goes from minus infinity to positive infinity, and therefore we can also calculate the correlation. So correlation between two stocks is actually derived from covariance between two stocks. So covariance divided by standard deviation of x times standard deviation of y. This can also be twisted into finding covariance of xy, which is nothing but correlation xy times standard deviation of x times standard deviation of y. X and y can be two random stocks, right? The advantage of correlation is that it has a range which is limited. So correlation has a limited range. It goes from -1 to +1 and 0. This is the range of correlation. Now we go to the next formulas where we will consider the portfolio. So now we will go for portfolio return, which is also denoted as RP, you can say, which is weight of A into return on A plus weight of B into return on B, and so on. Weight of N into return on N number of stocks. But the interesting formula is of portfolio risk, where we will actually be calculating risk in variance and then convert into standard deviation. So this is nothing but portfolio variance with the square root. So it is weight of A square variance of A plus weight of B square variance of B plus 2WA WB and covariance AB, and then the square root of everything. So this is the formula for portfolio risk for two stocks. Here remember that instead of covariance, you can also replace that with correlation AB, standard deviation of A, standard deviation of B. If there are more than two stocks, then the number of risk will be as the number of stocks, but the number of covariance combination, you can use the combination formula, which is n minus 1 by 2. Correct? This is for the number of covariances. Correlation is also an interesting thing, because when correlation is +1, correlation is -1, and correlation is 0, at this extreme end the portfolio risk formula becomes very small. So the portfolio risk formula for two stocks will be weight of A standard deviation of A plus weight of B standard deviation of B. It is basically A plus B. This is how we refer. For negative, it is weight of A standard deviation of A minus weight of B standard deviation of B, A minus B, and this is the reference that we do, A plus B, A minus B. And then you have weight of A square variance of A plus weight of B square variance of B, and this entire thing will be done with the square root, that is A square plus B square and square root. This is when portfolio risk is 0. Correct? These are the shortcut formulas for the extreme end of correlations. Also remember, when the portfolio correlation, the stock correlation is -1 exactly, portfolio risk can be 0. But if it is correlation is +1, even in that case portfolio risk can be 0. However, if short selling is allowed, that is negative weights. So if short selling is allowed, then portfolio risk can be 0 even at correlation of +1. And at correlation of -1, portfolio risk can be 0 as well. That's the lowest risk possible when you have the best correlation, that is -1, which is exactly opposite. Now let's take the next formula, which is the MVP. MVP is minimum variance portfolio. The formula derived by Professor Harry Markowitz, for which he got Nobel Prize in Economics. Minimum variance portfolio, it is also called as MVP. Here you get the optimum, the best weights, the weights at which the risk is the lowest between two stocks. So I'll take two stocks A and B. So MVP, what do you get? You get weight. Let's say weight of A, you'll get variance of B minus covariance of AB, divide by variance of A plus variance of B minus 2 covariance AB. This will give weight of A, and then you can find weight of A plus weight of B equals to 1. You can find the remaining weight of B. The next concept is theory of dominance. In theory of dominance, you have three rules. The first rule is that if all the stocks have same risk, choose the one with highest return. Choose the one with highest return, that will be ranked first. The second rule is if all the stocks, or if couple of stocks have same returns, then choose the one which has lowest risk and reject the other, they are inefficient. However, if the stocks have different risk and return, if they have different risk and return, then in order to rank them, you will have to calculate CV. CV is nothing but its coefficient of variation, which is a ratio of risk to reward, that is risk to returns, which is nothing but standard deviation over mean. Correct? Remember, this ratio, lower the ratio, better it is. That's the case with CV, and this is how you will rank them. Now the next formula is based on different ways of calculating expected returns. Now in our syllabus in CA final, we have 4 different ways of calculating expected return. The first one is based on CAPM. The second one is based on Sharpe index model or single index model. The third one is based on APT, arbitrage pricing theory. And the fourth one is based on the concept of capital market line, which is efficient market hypothesis. So based on CAPM, the formula is RF plus RM minus RF into beta. Based on the security characteristic line or Sharpe index model, as they say, it is RF plus RM into beta. It is based on A plus BX, the concept of A plus BX, the mathematical regression equation. APT has risk-free return plus you have multiple beta, multiple sensitivity. So you have beta 1 into risk premium 1 plus beta 2 into risk premium 2 and so on. So you have beta n risk premium, and you can add as many as risk premiums as you want. Correct? Now your risk premium is nothing but not RM minus RF, but it is actual return minus the expected return as per CAPM. Remember this in APT. Correct? Now when it comes to CML, in CML the formula is RF plus you have RM minus RF over standard deviation of M into the standard deviation of stock or portfolio or whatever. I've taken here stock I, you can also take portfolio. Remember here RM minus RF upon standard deviation of M is nothing but also called as the Sharpe ratio of market. Sharpe of market. We'll also see what is the Sharpe ratio going ahead. So basically there are 4 ways of calculating expected returns. Similarly, there are 2 ways of calculating portfolio risk, of which one of the way is what we've already seen, that is based on Markowitz model. So based on Markowitz model, the portfolio risk formula, which we've already done, which I'll reiterate here, weight of A square, variance of A plus weight of B square, variance of B plus 2WA WB covariance AB, and then the square root. This is the Markowitz formula which we've already done. There's also another formula based on Sharpe model where we use beta. Remember, the Sharpe has beta, where the portfolio risk, actually it is based on total risk, is nothing but systematic risk plus unsystematic risk. Now what is total risk? Total risk, systematic and unsystematic, that's what we'll derive here. total risk we can say as, let's say for a stock it is total risk, that is variance of a stock. Systematic risk is actually calculated as beta square for a stock times, we will take variance of market, it is the risk of market multiplied by beta, and the remaining is what we say unsystematic risk. Unsystematic risk is referred to as error of, let's say, stock, variance of the error. This is with respect to single stock. However, if you have a portfolio, we say variance of portfolio as total risk. Now instead of I will say beta of portfolio variance of market, and in terms of unsystematic risk I'll have to take the weighted average. So here the weighted average will be, let's say, weight of A square, error of A variance, weight of B square, error of B variance, and so on till the number of securities. Let's say you have till n, so variance of weight of n square, error of n in terms of variance. Remember, everything is in variance. You want, you can convert it in standard deviation as well. So there are two ways of calculating, so I'll just repeat, there are four ways of calculating expected returns under the CA final model, and there are two ways of calculating the portfolio risk. Institute has a habit of asking the portfolio risk using Markowitz and Sharpe using the names. Now there's one more formula that we'll be looking at that is very interesting, that is covariance between two stocks. Covariance between two stocks. So covariance, let's say between A and B, it can also be found using beta of A with market times beta of B with market and times variance of market. Now since I'm continuously using beta here, what is beta? Beta, let's say, of stock A and market is nothing but covariance of stock A and market divided by variance of market. Now instead of covariance, I can also write as correlation of A and M, standard deviation of A times standard deviation of M upon variance of market. If you adjust this, what you get is the another formula of beta, which is correlation of A and M, standard deviation of A over standard deviation of M. This is for individual security. If I want to make the beta for portfolio, then it is beta of A times weight of A plus beta of B times weight of B, and so on till weight of N times beta of N. This is how I get the portfolio beta formula. Finally, we will move to performance evaluation, and for performance evaluation we will have three ratios. This performance evaluation can be used for mutual funds, it can also be used for a portfolio. So the first ratio you have is Sharpe ratio, the second ratio you have is Trenor ratio, and the third ratio you have is Jensen's alpha. Let me quickly go through all three. Sharpe ratio is portfolio return minus risk free and divided by the standard deviation, it takes total risk. Trenor is portfolio return minus risk free divided by the systematic risk, which is nothing but the beta. And Jensen's alpha is absolute form of systematic risk, that is actual return on the portfolio minus the expected return. Remember, this expected return is as per CAPM, and we know expected return as per CAPM is nothing but RF plus RM minus RF into beta, correct? So your expected return is nothing as per CAPM plus but RF plus RM minus RF into beta. Well, that's it. These are the formulas. So I'll quickly revise the formulas that we've done here, and then we will number it as well. So the first we had the year-on-year returns, then we had mean, then standard deviation, covariance, correlation, then you have portfolio return, you have portfolio risk, and then you have portfolio risk with respect to different correlations with, and then you can also understand the property of portfolio risk. It can be lowest to zero if you have extreme correlations. Then you have the next formula, that is minimum variance portfolio, which gives you weight. Under the theory of dominance, you have a formula of coefficient of variation. Then you have the expected returns. There are four types of expected returns. Then you have portfolio risk using Markowitz, portfolio risk using Sharpe, correct? And then you have the another formula for covariance, the formula for beta. For there are two formulas for beta, and then you have a portfolio beta formula as well, and finally you have the Sharpe, the Trainer, and the Jensen's Alpha. So these are the multiple formulas that you have with respect to portfolio management. It has the highest number of formulas but is also the most scoring topic. So now we are starting with security valuation, and the first part is equity. The first thing that I'm going to start is with the Gordon's growth rate formula. We are now going to see the cost of equity using Gordon's growth, which is D1 over P0 plus G. D1 is the next year's dividend. Now how do I get D1? Is current year dividend times 1 plus growth percentage, right? Now when I twist the formula, so I take G on the other side and D1 over P0, and when I take P0 on the other side, I get D1 over KE minus G. Your P0 is nothing but it is called the intrinsic value. Well, I'm going to compare this P0 with current market price, and if P0 is current market price, what do we mention? We mention that if the P0 is current market greater than the current market price, we say that the stock is undervalued and therefore you should buy. If P0 is less than current market price, we say the stock is overvalued and therefore we should sell. And if P0 equals to current market price, we say the stock is correctly priced and therefore we should hold. This P0 is going to be our focus, the intrinsic value, the price today. Now when we go from single stage, what we did basically was a single stage model. Under the single stage Gordon's growth model, our P0 was D1 over KE minus G. Under the multi-stage model, we basically do P0 equals to D0 into, first we take the abnormal growth till the terminal year, we add all the dividends, we do 1 plus KE raised to T, plus we do the terminal year dividend times we add the normal growth rate, we do KE minus the normal growth rate and take everything back to the present value. Here the important thing is that when will be the terminal year. The terminal year depends from where the stock becomes perpetual. For example, if the stock has till the third year it is growing at an abnormal growth rate, and then it is going to saturate at a normal growth rate, so the third year will be the terminal year. Before that there will be abnormal growth rate. So this is how we calculate the formula for single stage and multi-stage. Here there are some important things to be noted. For example, the KE that we use is used using CAPM, which is RF plus RM minus RF into beta. The growth rate, the formula for growth rate is retention ratio times the return on equity. Now retention ratio, just a quick revision, is nothing but 1 minus payout ratio, and payout ratio is nothing but 1 minus dividend per share over earnings per share. ROE is nothing but PAT over total equity, and when you do it in per share, you get earnings per share over market price per share. You can use this as a reference. You can also, in future you'll require return on total capital, return on capital employed, which is EBIT over total capital employed, which is EBIT over debt plus equity, you can say. So these are the adjacent formulas that you'll require with respect to doing valuation of equities. Here through this we get the intrinsic value per share, that is P0, and then we're going to compare this P0 again with the current market price and make a stock decision here whether to buy, sell or hold. However, Gordon's growth and dividend based model is not the only model. This is also called dividend discount model, but there are models based on free cash flow as well. So let's check out the models based on free cash flow. Now going to the free cash flow based model, that is the free cash flow based model, the first one we will take is FCFA, free cash flow to the firm. The firm means debt equity preference all. Here how do we first calculate FCFF? That is crucial. We take net income plus non-cash charges, which is nothing but depreciation, plus we add back the interest 1 minus T minus the fixed capital investment minus the changes in working capital investment. I will do slight adjustment here. Now net income and interest 1 minus t, instead of that I can take EBIT 1 minus t. For non-cash charges and fixed capital, I will do fixed capital less depreciation. If you open the bracket, you'll get add minus the change in working capital investment. And if the CFA, if the institute gives us, whichever institute you are referring to, C or CFA, if they give you operating cash flow, so operating cash flow is nothing but net income plus non-cash minus change in working capital. So operating cash flow plus you will have interest 1 minus t minus the fixed capital investment. These are different ways of getting FCFF. What do we do with once we get the FCFF? Through FCFF we get the value of firm, which is nothing but FCFF 0 times the growth rate over KO minus G. Now what is KO? KO is nothing but WACC. This is for single stage. If it is for multi-stage, you know how to do that. FCFF 0 into 1 plus abnormal growth rate over 1 plus KO raised to T, summation of this, plus we will do FCFF for the terminal year into 1 plus normal growth rate over KO minus the normal growth rate 1 plus KO raised to T. If you see, the formula is the same. The only difference is that instead of P0 you have instead of dividend you have FCFF. Now what is KO? KO is nothing but weight of debt into cost of debt plus weight of equity into cost of equity. And here the growth is nothing but, again, it's a retention ratio, but since it is FCFF, instead of ROE it will have ROCE. Now value of firm, you get the entire value of firm, which is nothing but value of debt plus value of preference plus value of equity minus cash and bank balance. Now through this we will find the value of equity of the company, which is nothing but value of firm minus value of debt minus value of preference plus cash and bank balance. And from this, if you want to find intrinsic value per share, it is value of equity divided by the number of shares outstanding, and this P0 you'll be comparing with CMP. So this is the concept of FCFF. And now we will move to FCFE. Under FCFE, it starts with the formula. First of all, we need to find what is FCFE. It is again FCFF minus the interest will go out plus the net borrowings will come in. But this net borrowings will come in the ratio of debt, and it will go into fixed capital and working capital. Correct? So now if I take the FCFE and broaden it up, I will have net income plus interest 1 minus t minus interest 1 minus t will go out, minus fixed capital minus depreciation minus change in working capital plus this. And then if you see the formula, what you get is net income minus 1 minus debt ratio times fixed capital less depreciation minus 1 minus debt ratio times change in working capital. I've explained much detail about this in my other video, especially for FCFF and FCFE. You can check out from YouTube. So I've explained that in more detail. Why is it so? So basically your FCFE will be net income minus 1 minus debt ratio is equity ratio times fixed capital less depreciation minus equity ratio times change in working capital investment. Now debt ratio is nothing but debt over debt plus equity, and equity ratio is nothing but equity over debt plus equity. Debt ratio plus equity ratio equals to 1. So through this way what we get is FCFE. Now again through FCFE you get the value of equity FCFE 0 times 1 plus growth over KE. I will now take minus growth rate. For single stage, again for multi-stage, FCF is 0 times 1 plus abnormal growth rate till the terminal year over 1 plus KE raised to T, summation of all this, plus FCFE terminal year into 1 plus normal growth rate over KE minus the normal growth rate 1 plus KE raised to T. Correct? And then everything goes the same. Growth is equals to retention into ROE. So this is how you get value of equity. When you divide it by number of shares outstanding, what you get is P0, and again you go for the decision making. So this is how you get the valuation of shares. So now you get the value of equity using dividend discount model, using FCFF, using FCFE. Now the new concept is economic value added, which is also called as EVA. Now economic value added is also a concept in security valuation. Here EVA formula is net operating profit, which is EBIT1 minus T, minus the total invested capital, total invested capital at the cost. And what is the cost? That is nothing but weighted average cost of capital, which is in percentage. So here the net operating profit, this total invested capital and WAC, well, the net operating profit is nothing but EBIT1 minus T. Total invested capital can be debt plus equity times the WAC percentage, which will be given, or you may have to calculate, and this will give you EVA. Remember, EVA is the maximum value that the company can distribute for dividends. The next concept that we are going to see is convertible preference shares. Convertible preference shares. All these are the concepts in security valuation on the equity part. So under convertible preference share, we have three part: conversion ratio, then we have conversion value, and then finally we have conversion premium. So I'll quickly go through. The conversion ratio is nothing but number of equity shares for every preference share. For example, if the ratio is 1 is to 10, 1 is to 1, so you get 1 equity share for 1 preference share, or 10 is to 1, that means you'll get 10 equity share for 1 preference share. Conversion value is nothing but the conversion ratio, where you get the number of shares times the current market price of equity. That is the conversion value. And finally, conversion premium is nothing but your market price of preference shares minus the conversion value over the conversion value into 100. This answer will be in percentage. This is with respect to convertible preference shares. Now we go to the right issue and valuation of rights. Now under the right issue, the first formula is valuation of right, or we say value of right. Value of right. The formula is P0 minus NR into R over NS plus NR. Here NR is nothing but the number of rights, NS is nothing but number of shares, and R is the price of the right. P0 is the current market price. Similarly, you have X right price. X right price is nothing but you have P0 current market price times the number of shares plus number of rights at the right price divided by both number of shares plus number of rights. Now you also need to understand that from the come right price, which is the bigger price, if you subtract the value of right, which is like dividend, what you get the X dividend value, which is called in this case is the X right price. So it is like NAV minus dividend, you get X dividend NAV. Similarly, you have come right price minus value of right, you get X right price. This is how you can verify. So these are all the formulas for security valuation with respect to equity, and you can see it from the start. So here you have various formulas. You have we first did the cost of equity, the intrinsic value using single stage, multi-stage, and the formulas related to that. Then we understood the different types of FCFF and value of firm based on that, value of equity based on then FCFE as well, right? And then we got the intrinsic value, economic value added, convertible preference shares, and then the valuation of right. Correct? This is how we get the valuation of equity formulas. So now let's deal with security valuation, the other part, that is bond valuation. The first thing that we are going to find is intrinsic value, the way we found in equity. So in intrinsic value in bonds, you have P0, which is coupon, times the annuity function PVIFA for X percentage, which is the YTM for the T number of years. Plus in the last year you get redemption value into PVIF X percentage for T number of years. Well, this is the formula of intrinsic value for a bond which has limited maturity. Now for bond which has unlimited maturity or irredeemable or perpetual bond, the formula is simple coupon over YTM. That's the only formula for intrinsic value for perpetual bonds. The next formula that we are going to look is YTM, and for YTM we have a formula that is approximate YTM, where we have coupon, that is interest, plus the difference between redemption value minus current market price over the maturity of the bond, that is, you can also say the remaining life of the bond, divided by the average price, that is redemption value plus current market price times 100. This gives us the approximate formula for YTM. The actual formula for YTM you can find it from here, the missing figure, provided the other things are given to us. The next formula here is current yield. Current yield is very much like dividend yield in equities, which is nothing but you have the coupon divided by the current market price of the bond. Remember, this coupon is annualized coupon, and you have the price as current market price times 100, because the answer is going to be in percentage. Now we are going to go ahead with the duration, that is the risk of the bond, which is also called as the Macaulay duration by Frederick Macaulay, right? So in duration, the duration of a coupon bearing bond, which is generally less than a zero coupon bond. For zero coupon bond, the duration is equal to maturity. For coupon bearing bond, the duration is coupon times the time factor divided by 1 plus YTM, and the summation of all this. Here the T, the larger T, is nothing but the last year of the bond, the maturity of the bond, plus redemption value times the time, the last year, divided by 1 plus YTM raised to T. All this will be divided by price. This will give us duration. However, a much better way of duration is to do in a tabular format. Duration can also be calculated approximately for a perpetual bond where the duration is nothing but 1 plus coupon percentage upon YTM. This is not an exact way, but this is where you can find the approximate duration. Through the duration you can find modified duration, which is always negative, which is actually duration over 1 plus YTM. What modified duration gives me is percentage change in price of bond due to the percentage change in yield, or due to the percentage change in yield, or I can say YTM. Now this modified duration can be used to find the price change if you have the change in yield of the bond. Now we will see the formulas with respect to convertible debentures or convertible bonds, you can say. Convertible debentures or convertible bonds, there are various formulas. The first formula is the straight value. Now straight value of bond is nothing but the intrinsic value of bond, and intrinsic value we already did the equation, P0 coupon into PVIF and so on. Option value of bond is nothing but the current market price of bond minus the straight value of bond, which we calculated above. That is the option value of the bond. So here you have the downside risk of the bond, which is nothing but the option value, and if you want to calculate the downside risk in percentage, if you want to calculate in percentage, it is straight value minus current market price of the bond divided by current market price into 100. The next we go is the conversion ratio, like we calculated in preference shares. It is nothing but number of shares received on conversion for every single bond. for every single bond. So for example, if you receive 10 equity share for one bond, the ratio is 10:1. The stock value, or also called as the conversion value of bond, is nothing but the conversion ratio multiplied by the current market price of equity or stock. This is going to be the stock value of my bond. The next formula is conversion parity or conversion parity price. Conversion parity price, which is nothing but current market price of the bond divided by the conversion ratio. And through this, what I will get is the conversion premium. So the conversion premium is nothing but the conversion parity price minus the current market price of equity as of date. This will give me conversion premium. This will give me in rupee or dollar terms. If I want to find the conversion premium in percentage terms, my formula will be conversion premium, which I got from the above, divided by current market price of equity times 100. I will get the answer in percentage. Now there are new formulas, that is favorable income difference per share. Income difference per share. This is nothing but the coupon on the bond minus the dividend on the stocks multiplied by the exchange ratio. Exchange ratio, because for every bond you may get multiple numbers of stock, divided by the exchange ratio. Let's say you have 10 stocks for one bond, then the exchange ratio will be 10. Then you have premium payback period. Premium payback period, which is nothing but the conversion premium that you have paid, the extra money that you have paid, divided by the favorable income difference per share, divided by the favorable income difference per share. And finally, this is how you complete the formulas on bond. There are multiple formulas on bond and equity, all important, and this is how we cover the formula for security valuation bond: the intrinsic value, the calculation of YTM, the current yield, then we go with the duration, the modified duration, and then we go to the convertible, the straight value, option value, downside risk in dollar and in percentage terms, conversion ratio, conversion value, conversion parity price, conversion premium in dollar and in percentage, favorable income difference per share, and finally premium payback period. This is how we calculate the security valuation bond formulas. So now for mergers, acquisition and corporate restructuring, the first formula we will be having is the exchange ratio. Remember, the acquiring company is going to give shares to the target company. So the exchange ratio can be based on the EPS or based on MPS or book value per share, everything per share. Either of the acquiring or target, you can take either of the ratios, it will be, or it can also be the weighted average. So in the numerator you have EPS of target, in the denominator you have EPS of acquiring, or you can have MPS or book value per share or weighted average, right? The next formula is promoters holding after acquisition. So promoters holding post acquisition, I will write post acquisition. Remember, there are promoters from the acquiring company, so here you have shares in acquiring company, promoter shares in acquiring company. Basically I will write promoters shares in acquiring company, plus you have the exchange ratio times promoters shares in target company. So this is the formula for promoters holding post acquisition. So you have the acquiring company's promoters shares and the target company shares, where the promoters will get based on the exchange ratio. The third is percentage of promoters holding, which is the proportion which can be found as promoters shares divided by the total number of shares that the company may have, the total number of shares, and you can simply multiply this by 100 in order to get the percentage. The next ratio we will have is free float market capitalization. Now free float market capitalization can be calculated as the total number of shares the company has minus the promoter shares, it can be promoters or group companies, times the market price per share. It can also be found in another way, where you can find the total market cap of the company multiplied by the public holding, which will be in percentage. So if the market cap is $100,000 and the public holding is 60%, so it will be $60,000. So that is the another way, right? There is also another way of finding the market cap, which is nothing but if they give you free float market cap in the question, you can divide that by the free float percentage. So if you have the free float percentage and free float market cap, you can get the total market cap of the company. Market price per share and market cap per share post merger can be found as earnings per share times the PE ratio. Well, if they don't give you information, you have to take the PE ratio of the acquiring company. And market cap is nothing but market price per share times the number of shares post merger, right? Now there is another formula of exchange ratio, which is also called as swap ratio, which is a weighted average of various parameters. These parameters can be book value per share of target over book value per share of acquirer times the weights, plus they can have another factor like market price per share of target upon market price per share of acquirer times the weight for market price, plus they may have the capital adequacy ratio of target over capital adequacy ratio of acquirer times the weight of capital adequacy ratio. And finally you have gross NPA and the weight of gross NPA, but in this case there is a twist. In the numerator you have gross NPA of the acquirer divided by the target. That's a twist, because gross NPA being higher is a negative sign. First of all, what is gross NPA and what is net NPA? So net NPA is nothing but gross NPA minus the provisions, correct? So what is gross NPA, guys? Gross NPA in percentage will be nothing but the gross NPA, and I will divide that by the amount of loan given, which is the total advances times 100. Capital adequacy ratio, which is CAR, is the total capital divided by the risky weighted assets, of the bank, times 100. These are the very crucial ratios. Next we have for unlisted companies, we have few ratios, which is called project beta. So here we will have beta asset of the company, which is nothing but weighted average weight of debt times beta of debt plus weight of equity times beta of equity. That's a weighted average formula. Well, if nothing given, beta of debt is assumed to be 0, if nothing given, right? And therefore the beta of asset we will calculate with no taxation. When there is no taxation, beta of asset is nothing but weight of debt, that is debt over debt plus equity times beta of debt plus equity over debt plus equity times beta of equity. However, when you have tax, which is a normal scenario, your formula will still be the same. To the minor twist that you may have is that wherever you have debt, you will have to do 1 minus tax rate. That's the only twist in the formula whenever there is a tax rate. Also remember, when there is beta of debt is 0, in this case the beta of asset is nothing but beta of equity times the weight of equity. And when there is no debt at all, in that case beta of asset will be equal to beta of equity. So these are the formulas with respect to the mergers and acquisition. We've done the exchange ratio, promoters holding, in percentage, free float market cap, MPS and market cap post merger, swap ratio where we have the gross NPA percentage and capital adequacy ratio. And then for unlisted company you have beta of asset based on tax and without tax information and without debt information. So this is the entire formula for mergers and acquisition and corporate restructuring. Now we start with the formulas for foreign exchange exposure and risk management. The first formula that we will be looking forward is spread. Spread is nothing but the difference between the ask rate and the bid rate, and remember the spread is always positive. Similarly, you have the mid-quote formula, which is the average, which is ask rate plus the bid rate, and you'll simply do it the average divide by 2. This is the formula for mid-quote. Now this 2 will help you find the spread in percentage terms, which is nothing but the spread in absolute value divided by the average rate or the mid-quote, and since we have to get this in percentage, you multiply this by 100. This also helps you to find the bid rate and ask rate using the spread. So I will be finding the bid rate and ask rate using the spread, where the bid rate is nothing but the mid quote minus we will be doing the spread, but not the entire spread, only half of it. Similarly, for ask rate from the mid quote, what we'll be doing is that we'll be adding half of the spread. This is the formula with respect to spreads. So the next formula we are going to find is the forward rate. Now the forward rate can be found using the concept of interest rate parity as well as purchasing power parity. Forward rate is found using the spot rate with the ratio of the interest rates. Whether you do for IRP and for if you are doing PPP, it's the ratio of the inflation of both the currencies. Now the interesting part is that which currency. So what I use is that we always consider foreign exchange from the concept of base currency. So we are calculating forward rate of base currency, where we take into account the spot rate of base currency times 1 plus interest rate of variable currency over base currency. And similarly here it will be inflation of variable currency over the base currency. So I've done everything in the base currency form, and I would recommend you to also do the base currency form. However, the institute may do it in foreign and domestic currency. This will also help you find the concept of Fisher effect, which is very crucial. Fisher effect. And what Fisher effect basically tells you, that 1 plus nominal rate equals to 1 plus real rate times 1 plus inflation. This is the Fisher effect. So through this equation you can actually find the real rate. So the real rate can be 1 plus nominal rate divided by 1 plus inflation minus 1 will also give you the real rate, whether you do it for domestic currency or foreign currency. So the next formula is law of one price. Law of one price is used in the concept of purchasing power parity, where we find the price of good in domestic currency is nothing but price of good in foreign currency times the rate of foreign currency. So foreign currency should be the base currency here. This is the law of one price. The next formula that I'm going to use when we already have the forward rate is the annualized forward margin. Annualized forward margins. This is in short form also called as AFM, and this is nothing but AFM, which is in percentage terms is the difference between forward and spot in percentage terms. So forward minus spot over spot into 100, and since we are going to annualize, you can use 12 by T or you can use 365 by T depending on the days given. So this is the formula for annualized forward margin. If the answer is positive, it's premium. If the answer is negative, it is discount. So now we are dealing with the formulas on derivatives analysis and valuation. And the first concept is the theoretical future price. The theoretical future price also has different names. It is ideal or equilibrium future price or expected price in the future. The first thing we'll be doing is we'll calculate TFE for a stock or index, because for commodities it is quite different. So the formula theoretical future price is S0, that is spot today, plus the cost of carrying minus the dividend. The cost of carrying is nothing but it can be calculated on the spot into the rate of interest for the relevant time period. It can also be calculated in the terms of compounding, so I will write 1 plus r raised to t, or you can do exponential as well. Similarly, for dividend, it can be either absolute or it can be either yield. If it is dividend yield, you will have to calculate it on the spot and for the time period. If it is in couple of months, you can do simply 3 by 12. So this is the formula for theoretical future price for the stock or index. Now when it comes to the TFE for commodities, the formula slightly changes. So now you have spot, you have the cost of carrying, but instead of dividend, what we are going to do is that we are going to add lambda. Lambda is nothing but this is, you can consider storage cost or insurance cost and all other cost in case of commodities. So if in the stock you have a benefit like dividend, in commodities you have a cost which is added, that is the storage cost or insurance or various other costs, that is we call as lambda. Now we'll be focusing on a concept. Now let's focus on hedging. Now in hedging, we will be first hedging using futures. So for futures, I will require is the contract size. So contract size is nothing but the beta target minus beta of portfolio. This is the adjustment in beta times value of portfolio over the future contract size. Now future contract size is nothing but the quantity, that is number of futures into the value of one future. If I do the same with options, there is a minor change here. The contract size in that case is going to be, instead of beta, I will be using the option sensitivity, that is 1 over delta times the value of portfolio over option contract size. And in option contract size, I will take the option premium into the lots and the value of the premium. So this is just a minor difference in the future contract size and the option contract size. But before that, what exactly is the option delta? So option delta, or simply called as delta, is nothing but its percentage change in option premium or option cost, you can say, and that is due to the percentage change in the underlying asset. So the percentage change in underlying asset, it is very much similar to beta, where you have percentage change in the stock due to the percentage change in market, or like modified duration, where you have the percentage change in the price of bond due to the change in yield. So that is what option delta is. Now continuing with futures, you get a margin call. Now when do you get a margin call? When your account balance goes below the maintenance margin. So your margin call will be right from the initial margin amount minus the balance in the margin account. So this will only come when your account balance goes below the maintenance margin level. So continuing with the margin here, if they are asking you to find a break-even point, so the break-even point is actually the initial margin minus the maintenance margin. That's the difference, that's the lowest point. But since it is futures, you will divide it by the lot size. So the lot size, this will decide the break-even point. So finally, if you want to verify everything, your opening balance should tally as nothing but it should be if I subtract from the opening balance my mark to market loss, plus if I add any margin money that I've paid, margin call, it should match to the closing balance. This is the verification that you will have to do in order to see whether your margin account tallies. So now we are doing with the formulas on interest rate risk management. The first is forward rate agreement, FRA. Under FRA, the formula is the reference rate minus the rate of FRA, the forward rate of FRA. This will be divided because we have to bring the FRA to the present. So it will be 1 plus the reference rate, which will be decided on maturity, times D over 360 or 365 depending on what's given in the question, and this will be the rate. However, since the FRA is quoted on some principal amount, so that will perhaps be the notional principal. We'll have to multiply this difference with the notional principal times D over 360. It can be 360 or 365. Remember, it's notional principal because actually principal is not never exchanged. If this entire answer is positive, the FRA seller will have to pay to the FRA buyer, and if the answer is negative, the FRA buyer will have to pay the FRA seller. Remember, the FRA buyer, the borrower, wants the interest rates to go up, and FRA seller is the lender who wants the interest rate to go down. Now we focus on option pricing models, and on option pricing models we do have the first one, that is binomial option pricing model. Now when it comes to binomial option pricing model, I'll quickly go through how do we derive it. So you have a spot price, and the stock can go upwards or it goes downwards, and it has a probability of going upwards and downwards. Based on this, we focus on a concept of risk neutral model through which we derive the probabilities, and therefore the formula in that case is spot when it goes upwards times the probability of it going upwards plus spot when it goes down times the probability of it going down should be equal to the theoretical future price, which we just calculated before. This is the concept of risk neutral model. Through this we get the probabilities. The second that I'm going to focus not on the option pricing model, but the second is the put call parity, which is very crucial. The put call parity is an interesting parity where you have two positions. You have a spot plus the put, which should be equals to the call plus the present value of strike rate invested in a risk-free bond. So the left hand side position, this position is perhaps called as protective put, and the right hand side position is called as covered call. The outcome of both the position will be same, and therefore it is called put call parity. If you have any three, you can find the fourth. It is generally used if you have the call value, you can find the put value using put call parity. Now the second model that we are going to see in option pricing is very important, Black and Scholes model. And the formula that from Black and Scholes model, what we get is the formula of call today, which is nothing but S0 minus the present value of the strike rate. However, we will multiply this with the probability, which is ND1 and ND2. Remember, these are probabilities which you get from normal distribution, therefore you have ND1 and ND2. How to derive D1 and D2? For D1 we use the log natural of spot over the strike price, plus we will be adding the risk-free rate plus the variance but half of it, and multiply this with the time factor. All this will be divided by the standard deviation into square root of t. This will give us D1. For D2, it is nothing but D1 minus standard deviation into root of t. Remember this formula, it's not easy to remember. I have explained this in much detail in my other video. You can check out that video from T20 where I have explained the entire Black and Scholes derivation and the formula. Now under international financial management, there are two formulas which you'll again require, which we've already covered in forward, is that the in foreign exchange, that is the rate of the forward on the base currency, which is nothing but spot rate of base currency into 1 plus interest rate of variable currency over the base currency. Well, this is the formula of IRP, and under PPP everything else remains the same except instead of interest rate now we have inflation. So these are the two formulas which you'll require again in the international financial management, and so I've put it here as well. One more thing that you'll require is to convert the nominal cash flows into real cash flows and vice versa. So nominal cash flow is nothing but real cash flow and you add inflation to it. So 1 plus inflation percentage. Similarly, you can now find real cash flow. It is nothing but nominal cash flow divided by 1 plus the inflation rate. Correct? And one more very interesting formula is that of modified IRR. We have IRR, but modified IRR is nothing but it is derived from the equation of present value and future value, where the formula is future value over present value raised to 1 over t minus 1. How is this derived? We normally have the equation of present value into 1 plus r raised to t equals to future value. If you solve this, you will have future value over present value. You take t on the other side, it is 1 over t. You take minus 1 and then you get r. This compounded r is nothing but it is modified IRR. So these are the formulas that you'll require in international financial management. The next topic is risk management. Under risk management, we will be calculating the formula of value at risk. But before value of risk, we need to understand the normal distribution, where the institute may ask you the z-scores. Now what are z-scores? We'll focus on that. So there are 3 z-scores that you'll have to focus. The first one is on the confidence level of 90%, which is called the significance level of 10%. The second you will have on 95% confidence, which is nothing but 5% significance. And the last famous one is 99% confidence, which is 1% significance. Now at these, what are the z-scores? Well, the z-score here is 1.28, 1.65 and 2.33. So for 10% significance, you have the z-score as 1.28. For 5% significance, you have 1.65, and for 1% significance, your score is 2.33. If you are on the left side, it will be negative, otherwise it is positive. So it can be, since it's a normal distribution, it can be on the either side, but the value remains the same, only there's a difference in the sign. Now based on this, if I want to calculate value at risk, that is VAR, let's say at any percentage, it will be mean, that is x bar minus standard deviation, but I will now multiply this standard deviation with the z-score, which I get from the normal distribution. And this entire thing I will have to multiply with the value of portfolio. So here let's assume that if the VAR I'm calculating is at 10%, so in this case my z-score, instead of the z here, I will replace it with the value of 1.28. That will be the value I'll replace, and I'll get the probability and the value of loss. So what VAR gives you, it gives you the maximum loss that can happen at a particular probability, and at that probability we can conclude that this is the maximum daily or weekly or a monthly loss at a particular significance level. That's what VAR gives you. Now we are dealing with the formulas on money market, which is especially for the old course. So the first formula is discount yield, and the second formula is bond equivalent yield. Bond equivalent yield. Now there's a minor difference in both the case. So discount yield is face value minus the price divided by the face value into 100, and since we have to annualize, you can do 365 over t. T is the duration of the money market instrument. For bond equivalent yield, the formula is almost the same, but instead of dividing it by the face value, I will now divide by the price of the bond, which will give me the YTM or the yield. Again, we will annualize it. Now if I want to find the effective annualized yield, which is the same as what we did in time value of money, it is nothing but 1 plus the bond equivalent yield. Now the bond equivalent yield which we have raised to t minus 1. However, since it is effective where the money market duration is less than 1 year, we will have to do divide by n into n. Now what is n? N in this case is number of times compounding in a year. Compounding in a year. So if the instrument is for 90 days, so in a year, assuming 360 days, you'll have quarterly compounding, so it will be divided by 4. These are the important formulas with respect to money markets, and they are basically with respect to the yields. So now we are doing with the formulas on capital budgeting, and the first common formula that you will require is the cash flow after tax. The cash flow after tax is nothing but your net profit after tax plus you add the depreciation, the yearly depreciation. The second is the payback period, which is E plus B over C. Now what is E? E is the year preceding the year of recovery of initial investments. So it is the year before the recovery of your PVCO, or you can say of initial investment. Correct? What is B? B is the balance that you are requiring. So B, I will say, is balance, the balance in amount to be recovered, and C is the total cash flow in that year. C is the cash flow in the year of recovery. So that is the payback period. Now the next formula we have, and the crucial formula, is NPV, and NPV is nothing but present value of cash inflow minus present value of cash outflow. Similarly, you have profitability index, which is the ratio of PVCI over PVCO, and then you have another formula that is IRR. Well, IRR is nothing but it is a point at which PVCI minus PVCO equals to 0, or I can say a point where NPV equals to 0. That is the point. IRR is the discounting rate. So now let me take the project decision. Well, your project decision will be where PVCI is greater than PVCO, your NPV is greater than 0, your PI is greater than 1, and your IRR is actually greater than the cost of capital. In all these three aspects, we will say we will accept the project. But if your PVCI is less than PVCO, your NPV will be less than 0, your PI will be less than 1, and your IRR will be less than KO. In this case, we reject the project, and we are indifferent when we say PVCI equals to PVCO. This is the point where NPV is 0, your PI equals to 1, and your IRR equals to KO. This is the point of indifference. So this is the project decision with respect to NPV, IRR, PI, and so on. Now while doing the project, you may come across two different instruments with different life, and therefore we may have to calculate the annualized NPV of both the projects, or we may calculate as annualized cost, which is also called as equivalent annualized cost, EAC. Now in both the cases we are going to annualize, and how do we do that? It is the total NPV divided by the PV factor. So it is PVIFA, the annuity factor, X percentage for T number of years. And similarly, in case of equivalent annualized cost, it is a present value of net cash outflow divided by the PV factor. This will give me the average cost of the machine for a year, and based on this we will select which one is cheapest and we will buy that machine. So the next way of evaluating a project is using the ARR, which is nothing but average rate of return, also called as accounting rate of return, which is average NPAT divided by the average investment and multiplied by 100. This is the only method which uses profit and it is rarely used. Correct? Now when you have inflation to be adjusted in the project, especially the project cash flow, this is already covered in the international financial management and as well as forex, but here we note the Fisher effect. As per the Fisher effect, 1 plus nominal rate is 1 plus real rate times 1 plus inflation. So through this, if I want to find the nominal cash flow, I will take the real cash flow, multiply that with the inflation, correct? And if I want to find the real cash flow, I will discount or divide the nominal cash flow with 1 plus inflation. This is how we adjust the inflation in the project. Now when we are evaluating risk analysis and capital budgeting, we require some of the formulas which we've covered in portfolio management. The first is coefficient of variation, which is nothing but risk over return. So here we will have risk of the project in terms of standard deviation and average return of the project in terms of mean. Now we know that when we want to find mean, that is x bar, and when we want to find standard deviation, they are calculated without probability based on past data and with probability based on the future data. Now in this case we will find x bar, and x bar is nothing but summation of x over n. Your x bar will be x into p and its summation. For standard deviation of x, we will repeat x minus x bar the whole square, summation and average. This is variance, and when I do square root, I get standard deviation. Here it will be x minus x bar the whole square times probability, and this entire thing will be done in summation. So this will be my variance, and when I do square root of this, I get standard deviation. Now, how is this going to help me? Well, through this, I will be calculating the risk of the overall project. Now, when it comes to risk of the overall project, it depends whether the cash flows in the multiple years are dependent or independent. It's much like a portfolio where the stocks are related or not related. So I say the correlation is +1 or the correlation is 0. Now, in this case, we will have to find the standard deviation of the project in both the case where we will assume the cash flows are dependent or independent. If they are dependent, it will be given in the question. If nothing given, we can assume independent. So if the cash flows are dependent, the formula will be standard deviation of cash flow for year 1 into discounting factor for year 1 plus the standard deviation for cash flow in year 2 times the discounting factor for year 2, and so on till the last cash flow. Let's say the last cash flow is in the nth year times the discounting factor for n year. This is much similar to the correlation formula, the portfolio risk formula. When correlation is +1, it is A plus B plus C and so on. However, when the cash flows are independent, the portfolio risk formula, when cash flow is 0, what we did is A square plus B square and so on, and the square root. So here there will be a minor change, so it will be standard deviation of cash flow in year 1 times the discounting factor for year 1. I will do the square of it, standard deviation of cash flow in year 2 times the discounting factor for year 2, square of it, and so on till the last cash flow, and then you will multiply that with the discounting factor, square of everything, and you will also do the square root of everything because it is A square plus B square and square root. So this is how we find the risk of the project using whether the assumption of whether the cash flows are dependent or independent. And now when you're calculating the z value based on this for normal distribution, the standard normal distribution, your z value will be basically the target value that you're looking for minus the mean divided by the standard deviation of the project. This will give you the z value on the normal distribution curve, and based on this you can look out for the value that you're looking for. Let's say your mean is here, you're looking for the values below a particular point, so this will be your target value, and this is where you will get the values from the distribution table of normal distribution. The next topic is leasing and borrowing decision, where we are going to calculate the lease rental, the break-even lease, where the lessor wants to know what should be the break-even lease. So the formula here is PVCO, that is the present value of cash outflow, will be equal to the lease rental, and we will adjust tax from it because that's his income, and we will multiply this with the PV factor. So it will be PVIFA x percentage for t number of years. Now what is x percentage? X is nothing, but in this case I will write x is the required return by the lessor, and t is the lease time period, or the lease time, or the lease duration. So this is the formula for break-even lease rental. The next formula we are going to calculate is for equated annual installment. So now for calculation of equated annual installment, I've done two parts, end of the period and beginning of the period, because at times you pay the loan upfront. So here the formula is the loan amount, which is the principal amount that you're going to borrow, is equal to equated annual installments times PVIFA, the interest rate on the loan, comma, the duration of the loan. Similarly, if the amount is paid upfront, it is equated annual installment times the PVIFA, but now it will be 1 plus interest percentage for t minus 1 duration. That will be the minor change if it is at the beginning of the period compared to the end of the period. So these are the important formula when it comes to leasing. So now with respect to factoring services, the one formula which you'll require again and again is the debtors turnover ratio and the debtors velocity. The debtors velocity is also called as the average collection period. So the debtors turnover ratio is nothing but the credit sales over what we say is the average accounts receivable. So average accounts receivables, it is also called as average debtors, and debtors velocity is 12 over the debtors turnover ratio. Now what is average accounts receivable? Average accounts receivable is basically the opening and closing divide by the 2. So you can take the opening plus the closing divide by 2, and then this formula of debtors turnover you can basically use it to find either of the values. Finally, you have effective rate of factoring, which will be asked to you, and that effective rate of factoring is the net annualized cost of factoring, but this you will be dividing it with the actual amount you have received. So the actual advance granted or actual advance dispersed to you, and this you will multiply with 100 in order to get the answer in percentage. So these are the formulas with respect to factoring services. So under dividend policy, there are various models through which we get the price. The first is the Walters model. Now under the Walters model, how are we going to get the price? So price is the combination of what is paid, that is dividend, and what is not paid, that is earnings minus dividend, into the ratio of R over KE. What is R, what is KE? I have explained in much detail in the notes as well. But R is actually the return that you are going to make, and K is the return that you should make, divided by the cost of equity. So this is the first one, that is Walters model. The next model what we have already done is the Gordon's growth model. Under the Gordon's growth model, we get the price is nothing but the expected dividend over K minus G. The third model is Graham and Dodd model. This is also called as the traditional model. So this is also called as the traditional model, and under this model, this is one of the oldest model. Under this model we are going to find the price, which is actually dividend plus earnings over 3, a subjective 1/3 valuation, multiplied by the multiplier. The next is Linter's model. Linter's model gives you the expected dividend it does not give you the price, but the expected dividend, which is a combination of current dividend plus the target payout ratio from your earnings, and both of this have a weight. So if you're going to give dividend a weight of, let's say, C, for target payout ratio with your EPS, the weight will be 1 minus C. C is a hypothetical weight. So these are the formulas with respect to the dividend policy, and the most important of this is the formula, the Modi, Gilani and Miller. So under the model, the price is actually the next year's dividend and price divided by 1 plus KE. And if you want to find the market cap, it is N times P0, which is number of shares into price, which is the total market cap, which is price multiplied by M plus N. M is the new shares, M is the new shares, and N are the old shares, minus the investment plus the earnings divided by 1 plus KE. So I'll repeat, your NP0 is the total market cap, price of the share, the intrinsic value of the share. You can say M and N are the old and new shares, the I is the investment required, E is the earnings, and divided by 1 plus KE. This is the formula for And finally we go to the buyback formula. So under the buyback concept, we focus on the concept where value of company before and after the buyback should be same. There should not be much difference in the market cap. So value of the company before buyback is X, which is the number of shares before buyback, multiplied by the price before the buyback, should be equal to X minus B, the shares will be reduced, times the P1. Now P1 is the price basically after buyback, or called the buyback price. So here if we want to find P1, it is nothing but X multiplied by P0 divided by X minus B. So this is how we get the buyback price, or the price after buyback, which is X into P0 over X minus B. This is the theoretical buyback price. So how were the all formulas? I hope you really liked it and you have revised with me and have got the basic understanding. So overall, there are other videos which are uploaded on our YouTube channel. You can have a glimpse of it. There are videos with respect to the top 20 most difficult SFM sums, top 30 SFM theory, and also the entire playlist of revision test papers solved on the YouTube channel. So this is where on the channel you should subscribe and hit the like button and share it with your friends for all other information and updates in the future with regards to SFM. And in case if you're looking to buy any of our A2A handwritten notes, which is a around 1000-page handwritten notes of all the SFM varieties that you can see, around 400-500 sums for your exams, theories and explanations of formulas, you can order that from our website right now, eduinvest.in. Plus you can also order the fast track and the full course version of SFM from our website with exclusive offers. Thank you so much. Do share with your friends once again, and all the best for your exams. Do excellent in your exam, and SFM is definitely a subject for exemptions. It's not difficult to score 90, 95 or even 100, which has happened in the past, and one of our students have got 90 and many of them have got 80 plus and so on. So SFM is definitely a very easy subject, but you need to score well in order to pass through your difficult of the groups. So thank you so much once again, and all the best for your exams.